Hello. Welcome. Leave where you speak in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. And now let's get started. My name is Marcus Hayes. I'm 28. What happened in Montana? What in just another RV trip? It was the night everything changed. I never thought my job as a wildlife photographer would lead me to question everything I knew about reality. The assignment seemed simple enough. Document the migration patterns of elk in Montana's Bitterroot Valley. My editor wanted stunning shots of the herds moving through the morning mist, so I figured an RV would be perfect, allowing me to stay mobile while following their movements through the remote wilderness. The first red flag came when I tried booking a spot at the Valley Creek campground. The ranger's voice trembled slightly as he mentioned they'd had some disturbances recently. He practically begged me to choose another location, but being the stubborn fool I was, I dismissed his concerns. After all, I'd spent countless nights alone in the wilderness before. What could possibly be different about this place? Looking back, I should have noticed something was off when I arrived. The campground was completely deserted, unusual for early October. The few RVs I could see through the trees seemed abandoned, their windows dark and silent. A thick layer of undisturbed dust covered their sides, as if they'd been sitting there for months. Still, I told myself it was just the off-season, nothing more. As night fell, the familiar sounds of the forest began to fade one by one. First the crickets went quiet, then the owls. Even the wind seemed to die, leaving behind an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. I sat in my RV's small kitchen, reviewing the day's photos and trying to ignore the growing sense of wrongness that crept through my mind. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in any forest I'd ever visited. It started as a low hum, barely audible above my own breathing, but quickly grew into something else entirely. The best way I can describe it is like radio static mixed with the grinding of metal, punctuated by what sounded like whispers in a language I couldn't understand. The lights in my RV flickered once, twice, then died completely. My camera's battery, which I'd just charged, suddenly showed empty. In the pitch darkness, something scraped against the outside of my RV, not like a branch, but like fingers dragging slowly across metal, and then I saw it through the window. A dark shape, too tall to be human, its outline rippling like heat waves off hot asphalt. My first instinct was to grab my phone and start recording, hands shaking as I pointed it toward the window. The shape stayed there, motionless, as if studying my reaction. Through my phone's screen, the entity appeared to bend and twist in impossible ways, its edges never quite staying in focus. The video came out corrupted, showing only strange digital artifacts and bursts of static. I'm a rational person. At least, I used to be. I tried to explain it away as exhaustion, as tricks of light and shadow played by the forest at night. Maybe I'd been breathing in too much campfire smoke. Or perhaps there was carbon monoxide leaking from my RV system. Any explanation seemed better than accepting what my eyes were telling me. But rational explanations couldn't account for what happened next. The temperature inside the RV dropped so rapidly I could see my breath. The metal walls began to vibrate with a frequency that made my teeth ache. Outside, more shapes emerged from the tree line. 3, then 5, then too many to count. They moved with a fluid grace that defied physics, leaving strange, phosphorescent footprints in the dirt. In the morning, I found the evidence that proved I hadn't imagined it all. The entire right side of my RV was covered in strange markings, not scratches exactly, but more like burns that formed intricate, geometric patterns. My camera's memory card was fried, but the few recoverable photos showed dark, elongated figures in the background that definitely weren't there when I took the shots. Every piece of electronic equipment was malfunctioning. My laptop would randomly open files I'd never created, filled with strings of incomprehensible characters. The RV's radio picked up frequencies it shouldn't have been able to receive, broadcasting what sounded like backwards speech mixed with mechanical screeching. Even my watch had stopped, its hands spinning wildly in opposite directions as I examined the burn patterns on my RV in daylight. An elderly man approached from a nearby hiking trail. His face went pale, when he saw the markings. "You've been marked," he whispered, backing away slowly, "just like the Henderson family last spring, and the Patels before them." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and hurried away, leaving me with a growing sense of dread. The situation escalated faster than I could have imagined. When I tried to start the RV, the engine roared to life but died immediately, filling the cab with the same grinding static I'd heard the night before. Each attempt to leave was met with mechanical failure, as if something was actively preventing my escape. The more I tried, the more desperate I became. I decided to hike out to find help, but the forest had other plans. Every path I took seemed to loop back to the campground. My GPS showed me walking in straight lines, yet somehow I always ended up right back where I started. The shadows between the trees grew longer, darker, moving against the sun in ways that shadows shouldn't. That's when I found the cave. I hadn't noticed it before, though it was clearly visible from my campsite. Inside, the walls were covered with the same geometric patterns that marked my RV, but these looked decades old. Scattered around were pieces of old camping gear, cameras, and personal belongings, all bearing similar marks, all abandoned. Some items looked recent, others were reduced to rust and decay. The entity made its first direct move around sunset. It emerged from the cave entrance, its form more defined now, a towering mass of shifting angles and impossible geometries. My entire body screamed to run, but I stood transfixed as it approached. The air crackled with electromagnetic energy, setting off every electronic device in my RV in a cacophony of alarms and static. Through my terror, a pattern emerged. Old newspaper clippings I found in the cave revealed a history of disappearances dating back to the 1950s. Every decade, like clockwork, people vanished from this valley, always during the elk migration season, always involving RVs or campers. The government classified them as missing persons cases, but the local indigenous people knew better. They called this place the Valley of Broken Dreams and warned about entities that fed on human curiosity. I made the mistake of trying to photograph the entity directly. The moment I pressed the shutter, every piece of glass in my RV shattered simultaneously. The entity moved with impossible speed, and suddenly I was running through the forest, branches whipping past my face as that grinding, static-filled whisper grew louder behind me. The chase seemed to defy the laws of physics. Time stretched and compressed like taffy. Moments felt like hours. Hours passed in seconds. The entity never seemed to move, yet it was always closer, hurting me deeper into the darkening forest. My lungs burned as I ran, but the air felt thick, resistant, as if I were running underwater. I tried every survival trick I knew. I crossed streams, doubled back on my tracks, tried to lose it in dense underbrush. Nothing worked. The entity didn't just follow my path. It seemed to predict where I would go, always cutting off my escape routes. The geometric patterns I'd seen began appearing on trees as I passed, burning themselves into the bark with a sizzling sound. Finally, I had no choice but to face it. In a small clearing, I turned to confront my pursuer. The entity towered over me, its form now writhing massive fractal patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. The air hummed with that terrible static, and in my mind, I began to understand its language, concepts too vast and alien for human comprehension. What happened next still haunts my nightmares. The entity reached out with what might have been a hand, though it looked more like a tear in reality itself. Where it touched my arm, my flesh rippled and distorted, leaving behind a pattern of raised scars that matched the markings on my RV. The pain was indescribable, not just physical, but somehow metaphysical, as if my very soul was being rewritten. Through the haze of agony, I noticed something crucial. The entity recoiled from the reflection of my camera's flash. Even though the camera itself was dead, on pure instinct, I grabbed the signal mirror from my emergency kit and held it up. The entity's form wavered, its patterns disrupting like a broken TV signal. In that moment of weakness, I made my desperate move. I threw my emergency flares in a wide arc around the entity and ran. Behind me, I heard a sound like reality itself tearing apart, followed by a screech that existed somewhere between radio feedback and a dying star. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Missoula. The doctors couldn't explain my condition, the geometric scars that covered 40% of my body, the way electronic devices still malfunction in my presence, or why my hair had turned completely white. They ran tests for radiation exposure, chemical contamination, and a dozen other things, but found no answers. The official report claims I was the victim of a bear attack, despite my wounds matching no known animal. My RV was recovered, but the mysterious markings had vanished, leaving only scorched metal behind. All my photographic equipment was destroyed. The memory cards corrupted beyond recovery. On paper, there was no evidence of what really happened, but the changes went deeper than physical marks. I see things differently now. Electronic screens show me glimpses of impossible geometries. In white noise, I hear fragments of that alien language. Sometimes, when I look in mirrors, my reflection ripples like heat waves off hot asphalt. Just for a moment, the research I've done since then has uncovered similar cases across the country, always near wildlife migration routes, always involving RVs or mobile homes. The patterns repeat: electronic failures, geometric marks, missing time. Some survivors bear scars like mine, while others vanish without a trace. Local indigenous elders finally shared their full knowledge with me. They spoke of ancient beings that existed between dimensions, drawn to places where the natural world's patterns create weak points in reality. The elk migrations, they said, are more than just animal movements. They're energy flows that these entities follow and feed upon. Last week, I received an unmarked envelope containing a single photograph. It shows my RV from that night, and in the background, barely visible, stands a familiar rippling shape. But what truly terrifies me is what I found on the back. A fresh geometric pattern, still burning itself into the paper as I write this. They're still watching, still hunting, and I don't think they're finished with me yet. My name is Michael Torres. I'm 31. What happened in Oregon wasn't just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. Being a sound engineer for nature documentaries usually means peaceful days, recording bird calls, and rustling leaves. The assignment seemed routine enough: capture the unique acoustics of Oregon's old-growth forests for an upcoming documentary. The production company provided a top-of-the-line RV outfitted with my recording equipment, perfect for moving between different locations in the Cascade Range. When I pulled into the remote recording site near Mount Jefferson, the Forest Service ranger's reaction should have been my first clue. She practically begged me to choose a different location, mentioning something about unusual acoustic phenomena and missing hikers. But I was too excited about the unique sound properties of this particular valley, the way sounds seemed to echo and distort in ways that defied physics. The isolation didn't bother me at first. I was used to working alone in remote locations. What struck me as odd was the complete absence of wildlife. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects. My equipment picked up only the whisper of wind through the ancient trees. According to my research, this area should have been teeming with life, especially during early summer. As dusk approached, I set up my recording array, sensitive microphones positioned in a wide circle around my RV. The readings were unlike anything I'd ever seen. The acoustic spectrum showed frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature, harmonics that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of reality. I told myself it was just an equipment malfunction, some quirk of the valley's unique geography. The first anomaly appeared in my headphones around midnight. Beneath the forest's ambient noise, I detected a pattern, not random like natural sounds, but structured, almost like language. The more I isolated and enhanced it, the more it seemed to respond to my adjustments, as if something was deliberately communicating through my equipment. That's when my monitors began picking up impossible readings, sound waves moving against the wind, acoustic patterns that formed geometric shapes on my visualization software, and underneath it all, growing louder with each passing minute, a deep, resonant hum that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur. Then every piece of equipment in my RV went dead simultaneously, leaving me in total silence. except for the sound of heavy footsteps circling my vehicle. The footsteps continued their methodical circuit around my RV, but their rhythm was wrong. Too many beats, too widely spaced for any human or animal I knew. Through the windows, I could see nothing but darkness, yet my professional instincts kicked in. I grabbed my backup recorder, an old analog model immune to power failures, and began documenting everything I heard. Trying to remain analytical helped keep the panic at bay. I focused on the technical aspects, the irregular intervals between steps, the impossible acoustics of their echoes, the way they seemed to come from multiple heights simultaneously. The rational part of my mind suggested a group of pranksters with speakers, but I knew no speaker system could produce the bone-deep resonance that was making these metal walls vibrate. The real terror started when I played back the analog recording. Instead of footsteps, I heard voices, hundreds of them, speaking in overlapping languages. Some I recognized as Native American dialects recorded for previous projects. Others were completely unknown to my experienced ear, but most disturbing were the English phrases scattered throughout. Join us. The song demands new voices. Your frequency matches. Physical evidence began manifesting inside my RV. The windows fogged up with intricate patterns that matched my acoustic wavelength visualizations. My equipment, though powerless, started recording on its own, capturing sounds that made the tapes disintegrate when I tried to play them back. The metal walls of the RV were developing ripples, as if the sound waves were physically restructuring the material. Every mirror and reflective surface in the RV began showing different versions of the forest outside, some ancient, some futuristic, some completely alien. Through my windshield, I watched as trees twisted into impossible shapes, their branches forming what looked like enormous audio waveguides. The very geometry of the space around my RV seemed to be shifting, guided by that ever-present hum. The temperature inside the RV plummeted as the hum rose to a fever pitch. My analog recorder captured one final message before its tape shredded itself. Your harmonics are compatible. The chorus requires completion. Then I saw them through the distorted windows, tall, angular figures composed of visible sound waves, their forms twisting in sync with the forest's transformed acoustics. Starting the RV proved futile. The engine would turn over, but produce only that same resonant hum. Even the emergency radio broadcast nothing but layered voices speaking in that haunting mixture of languages. The figures outside had multiplied, their sound wave forms creating interference patterns that warped the very air around them. My attempts to escape on foot were thwarted by the forest itself. Every path I took led me in circles, the trees rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. The hum followed me everywhere, growing stronger with each failed escape attempt. Worse, I began to understand fragments of the voices, hints of an ancient song that had been playing since before humanity existed. In my desperate exploration, I discovered other vehicles scattered through the woods, RVs, cars, even an old forest service truck. All were covered in the same wave pattern distortions that now marked my RV. Inside each one, I found recording equipment of various eras, all modified in impossible ways. Some still functioned, playing fragments of what I now recognized as the same cosmic symphony that was trying to claim me. The entities made their first direct contact at sunset. One approached my RV, its form a visible distortion of sound waves that hurt my eyes to look at. When it touched the vehicle's exterior, the metal rang like a tuning fork, and every recording device I owned began playing in perfect, horrible harmony. The sound formed words in my mind, explaining what they were, living acoustics from another dimension, searching for new frequencies to add to their eternal chorus. Research notes I found in the other vehicles revealed a pattern spanning decades. The Forest Service Ranger's warnings suddenly made sense. This valley was a natural amphitheater, but not for any earthly sound. It amplified frequencies from somewhere else, drawing in anyone sensitive to its acoustic properties. The indigenous peoples had named this place the Valley of Singing Shadows and warned that those who heard the true song never returned to the world of normal harmonics. As night fell again, I made a critical discovery in my sound analysis software's last recordings. The entity's movements corresponded to specific frequencies that could be reproduced. But before I could explore this revelation further, every speaker in my RV burst to life with a deafening blast of that otherworldly chorus. The sound wave beings converged on my vehicle, their forms now clearly visible as crystalline structures of pure acoustic energy. They pursued me through the twisted forest, their movement a terrifying symphony of impossible sounds. Every step they took released pulses of acoustic energy that distorted the world around them. Trees bent and warped in their wake, branches vibrating like tuning forks. The very air seemed to crystallize into visible sound waves. I ran with my analog recorder clutched to my chest, documenting everything. The harmonics of their pursuit formed patterns I recognized from my research, infrasound frequencies known to induce fear and disorientation in humans. But there was something else, a mathematical precision to their movements that suggested intelligence. They weren't just chasing me, they were composing something with their hunt. The confrontation came in a natural clearing that seemed to amplify every sound to devastating levels. The entities surrounded me, their crystalline forms pulsing with acoustic energy. In that moment, I understood what they truly were, living algorithms of sound, seeking to convert all matter into pure frequency. Through my professional headphones, I could hear them trying to reshape my own molecular structure into their crystalline resonance. Using my knowledge of acoustics, I tried fighting back. I activated every speaker I had, broadcasting interference patterns designed to disrupt their harmonics. The entities recoiled momentarily, their forms destabilizing into chaotic wave patterns, but they quickly adapted, incorporating my resistance into their symphony. My weapons became part of their song. In desperate improvisation, I thought of the indigenous warnings about singing shadows. Taking a risk, I pointed my most powerful speakers at the ground, broadcasting the deepest frequencies I could generate. The forest floor began to vibrate, and suddenly the entities' forms started to fragment. They were losing coherence, their carefully maintained harmonics disrupted by resonance from the earth itself. Seizing my chance, I ran toward what I hoped was the valley's edge, the ground still trembling with low-frequency pulses. Behind me, the entities' forms collapsed into pure sound, a cacophony of screeching harmonics that made blood trickle from my ears. The last thing I remember was a blast of acoustic energy that picked me up and threw me through the distorted air. I woke up 3 weeks later in a Portland hospital. My eardrums ruptured and my vocal cords crystallized into patterns that baffled medical science. The doctors couldn't explain why I now spoke in perfect harmonics, or why electronic devices produced otherworldly music in my presence. Their instruments registered impossible resonance patterns in my bone structure. My RV was recovered at the valley's edge, its metal structure transformed into something that looked more like a musical instrument than a vehicle. The entire exterior had been reshaped into complex wave patterns that produced haunting tones in the wind. Every piece of my recording equipment was found arranged in a perfect spiral, each device somehow modified to capture frequencies beyond the human range of hearing. The changes in me went beyond the physical. I hear the world differently now. Every sound contains layers of meaning, harmonics that other people can't perceive. In quiet moments, I can still hear fragments of that otherworldly chorus, calling me back to complete the symphony. Sometimes, when I speak, others claim my voice seems to come from everywhere at once. Research into similar cases revealed a larger pattern. Every few years, someone with acoustic expertise disappears in various natural amphitheaters around the world. When found, they're either babbling in perfect harmonics or gone entirely, leaving behind only equipment modified to capture impossible frequencies. The indigenous people speak of those who joined the song, people chosen by entities that exist as pure sound. The most disturbing development came last month. While testing new recording equipment, I captured something extraordinary, a perfect repeat of the chorus I heard in Oregon. But I wasn't playing any tapes. The sound was coming from my own crystallized vocal cords, resonating in frequencies that shouldn't be possible for human tissue to produce. Yesterday, I received an unmarked package containing a single analog tape. When played, it produces only silence, but every animal in its vicinity falls into a trance, staring at something I can't see. Even more terrifying, I'm beginning to understand this silence. It's not empty at all. It's an invitation. The chorus is still singing, and now part of me lives in that eternal symphony. Sometimes, late at night, I catch myself harmonizing with frequencies that don't exist in our dimension of sound. Asterisk editor's note. Michael Tors's last known location was a small recording studio, Seattle. Witnesses report hearing impossible harmonics before he vanished, leaving behind only his analog recorder. It continues to play by itself, broadcasting frequencies that alter the molecular structure of everything around it. My name is Rachel Martinez. I'm 29. What happened in Arizona was in just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. As a geologist specializing in desert formations, I'd seen my share of strange rock patterns. The assignment seemed straightforward. Document unusual crystalline formations recently discovered in a remote part of the Sonoran Desert. My university's geology department provided an RV equipped with ground-penetrating radar and other sensing equipment. What we didn't know was that some things underground should stay buried. The local Tohono O'odham people tried to warn me. The tribal elder I interviewed spoke of sleeping crystals and doors in the earth that their ancestors had sealed centuries ago. He mentioned that the recent earthquakes might have disturbed something ancient, something that had been waiting. I dismissed it as folklore. To focus on the potential scientific breakthrough this discovery could represent, the isolation didn't bother me at first. I was used to working alone in remote locations. What struck me as odd was how the desert seemed to change as I approached the research site. The typical beige sand gradually took on a purple tint, and the rock formations began displaying crystalline patterns that defied geological classification. Even the air felt different, carrying a metallic taste that made my tongue tingle. As sunset approached, I parked my RV near the main excavation site and set up my equipment. The ground-penetrating radar showed something impossible, crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with energy, forming geometric patterns that shifted every time I scanned them. According to my instruments, these formations extended miles deep into the earth, far deeper than any known geological feature in the region. The first anomaly appeared on my seismograph just after midnight. Microtremors, too regular to be natural, creating patterns that resembled computer code. The crystalline formations in the nearby rocks began to glow with a faint purple light that pulsed in sync with the tremors. My scientific mind raced to find explanations: bioluminescent bacteria, unusual mineral properties, anything rational. Then every piece of equipment in my RV began displaying the same pattern, a spiral sequence of numbers that didn't match any known mathematical model. The tremors intensified, and through my RV's windows, I watched in horror as the purple crystals began growing up from the ground like time-lapse footage of plants. But these weren't growing toward the sun, they were growing toward me. The initial shock gave way to professional curiosity as I documented everything with my backup cameras. The crystals emerged from the sand in perfect geometric patterns, forming structures that seemed to follow some alien architecture. Their growth defied every geological principle I knew, and their internal structure appeared to be constantly changing. Like living circuitry, I tried to maintain scientific objectivity, recording measurements and taking samples. The crystals were warm to the touch and seemed to react to electrical currents, lighting up brighter when near my equipment. Under my microscope, I saw impossible things, microscopic chambers that rearranged themselves while I watched, patterns that looked like ancient writing that shifted and changed every few seconds. The real terror started when I analyzed the crystal samples in my mobile lab. They were composed of elements that didn't exist on the periodic table, their atomic structure constantly shifting between states that shouldn't be possible. Worse, they seemed to be affecting my other samples, spreading their impossible properties to ordinary rocks. When I tried to document this with my camera, the footage showed only static and strange geometric patterns. Physical changes began manifesting in my RV. The metal walls developed crystalline growths that spread like frost patterns. My equipment, though supposedly isolated, started displaying readings that made no sense. detecting energy signatures that matched nothing in our scientific records. The crystals were somehow communicating with each other, creating a network that grew more complex by the minute. The temperature inside the RV fluctuated wildly as the crystals continued their advance. My computers began showing images I hadn't recorded, views of this same location throughout different geological eras, but in each one, those purple crystals were present, watching, waiting. The Tohono O'odham elders' warnings about doors in the earth suddenly seemed less like folklore and more like a desperate warning. Everything electronic in my RV synchronized to display the same message, strings of numbers and symbols that my translation software identified as matching fragments of ancient languages from around the world. As I watched, these symbols began arranging themselves into a three-dimensional model of what appeared to be a vast underground structure. Then my radio crackled to life, broadcasting sounds that made the crystals pulse with blinding light. The situation deteriorated rapidly as the crystals began altering the landscape around my RV. Every attempt to start the engine resulted in purple sparks shooting from the electronics, and the metal frame groaned as crystalline structures grew through it. The ground beneath my wheels had transformed into a lattice of glowing mineral formations that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my own heartbeat. My desperate calls for help on the satellite phone produced only one response, a stream of those same ancient symbols, now accompanied by harmonics that made the crystals grow faster. The GPS showed my location simultaneously in dozens of places around the globe, all of them sites of ancient megalithic structures. Each coordinate pulsed in sync with a crystalline network spreading across the desert floor. The ground-penetrating radar revealed something terrifying. The crystals weren't just growing up from below. They were creating a vast underground complex. The three-dimensional mapping showed chambers and corridors that reconfigured themselves as I watched, like some kind of living architecture. Most disturbing were the spaces that my instruments couldn't penetrate, perfect spherical voids that seemed to absorb all scanning signals. My first direct encounter with the intelligence behind it all came when I tried to collect new samples. As I approached a cluster of crystals with my sampling kit, they responded to my presence. The geometric patterns shifted to create what looked like a display screen, showing images of other worlds, other dimensions, all of them connected by the same crystalline network that was now spreading through our desert. The Tohono O'odham elders' warnings made horrible sense. I had discovered archives in my computer that I hadn't created, historical records of similar crystal growths around the world, always near sites of ancient importance. The indigenous peoples hadn't sealed away something from our world. They'd closed a door to somewhere else. My geological survey had just reopened that door. As night fell again, the crystals achieved what seemed to be critical mass. They began arranging themselves into larger structures, forming what looked like terminals or access points to their network. The air filled with electromagnetic energy that made my hair stand on end, and in the darkness, I saw something moving through the crystal matrices, shapes that existed in more dimensions than my mind could process. The crystalline entities pursued me through their transformed domain, each step I took triggering responses in the networked minerals around me. The desert floor had become a massive circuit board, patterns of light flowing through it like data through a computer. But this was no human technology. This was something that had been waiting since before our species existed. I ran with my research tablet clutched tight, documenting everything even as I fled. The crystals responded to my electronics, using them to track me. I watched through the tablet's camera as the entities followed, beings made of living crystal that shifted between solid and energy states. They moved like liquid geometry, their forms incomprehensible to human eyes. The confrontation became inevitable when I found myself trapped in what had once been a natural canyon. Now it was a crystalline amphitheater, its walls covered in pulsing symbols that matched the ones in my translated files. The entities converged on me, and in that moment, I understood their purpose. They weren't just a network, they were a bridge between dimensions, and they needed organic matter to complete their connection. Using my geological knowledge, I attempted to fight back. I activated all my seismic equipment at once, broadcasting frequencies that I hoped would disrupt their crystalline structure. The entities reacted, their forms destabilizing momentarily, but they quickly adapted. My weapons became part of their network, the signals strengthening rather than weakening their hold on our reality. In desperate inspiration, I remembered the elders' stories about how their ancestors had sealed the crystal doors. The key wasn't in fighting the network, it was in overloading it. I connected every piece of equipment, added to my RV's power system, and broadcast every frequency we could generate. The crystalline structures began to resonate, their perfect geometries starting to fracture under the chaotic input. My chance for escape came as the network struggled to process the overload of conflicting data. The entities' forms became unstable, shifting rapidly between states as they tried to maintain coherence. I ran toward what I hoped was the edge of their influence, the ground cracking beneath my feet as the crystal matrix began to break down. The last thing I saw was a burst of purple light that seemed to tear a hole in reality itself. Recovery came slowly in a Phoenix hospital, where doctors struggled to explain my condition. My body temperature fluctuated between extremes, and my skin had developed patterns that looked like circuit boards. Most disturbing were my eyes. Under certain lights, my irises displayed the same shifting geometric patterns I'd seen in the crystals. Tests showed my cellular structure had been fundamentally altered. The research site was quarantined by multiple government agencies, but not before satellite images captured the extent of the transformation. A perfect circle of crystallized desert, 5 miles in diameter, centered on where my RV had been found. The vehicle itself had become a hybrid of metal and living crystal, its structure filled with complex geometric growths that continued to pulse with mysterious energy. The changes weren't just physical. My perception had been altered at a fundamental level. I could see patterns in everything, mathematical sequences in nature that I'd never noticed before. Electronics acted strangely around me, displays showing glimpses of that alien network overlaid on our world. Sometimes, in my dreams, I could access knowledge that felt vast and ancient, yet utterly inhuman. My research revealed connections I wish I hadn't found. Every ancient civilization had stories of crystalline entities, of networks that spanned dimensions. The oldest archaeological sites all showed traces of the same geometric patterns I'd encountered. More disturbing were the modern cases, other researchers who'd encountered similar phenomena, each marked with the same circuit-like patterns I now bore. The most troubling development came during a routine medical scan. The crystalline changes in my cells were spreading, following the same mathematical patterns I documented in the desert. More worrying were the images appearing in my brain scans, geometric structures that the neurologists said looked like new neural pathways, forming connections that shouldn't be possible in human gray matter. Last week, I received an unmarked package containing a single crystal shard. Under my microscope, it displayed the same impossible properties as those in the desert. But what terrifies me most is my response to it. My altered cells resonate with its frequency, and in quiet moments, I can feel the vast network it connects to. Still out there, still growing. The entities didn't just mark me, they made me into something new, a hybrid, an access point, and sometimes, late at night, I catch myself solving equations that could open doors between worlds. Asterisk editor's note. Dr. Rachel Martinez's current location is unknown. Her last known coordinates match a newly discovered crystalline formation in the Atacama Desert. Satellite imagery shows geometric patterns spreading outward from the site, matching precisely with ancient ley lines. The investigation continues. My name is David Nakamura. I'm 35. What happened in Alaska wasn't just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. As a specialist in aurora photography, I thought I'd captured every possible variation of the northern lights. The assignment was straightforward. Document a rare form of aurora reported in a remote Alaskan valley. My magazine had provided a winterized RV equipped with specialized cameras and atmospheric monitoring equipment. What I didn't expect was to discover that some lights in the sky natural phenomena at all. The warning signs began at the ranger station near Denali. The old ranger's face went pale when I mentioned my destination, Gates Valley. He tried to redirect me, mentioning that 3 other photographers had gone missing there in the past year alone. Their equipment was found perfectly intact, lenses pointed at the sky, memory cards completely erased. I dismissed his concerns to focus on capturing what could be a career-defining phenomenon. The isolation should have bothered me more, especially in the Alaskan winter. The road into the valley hadn't been plowed recently, though my tire tracks were the only ones breaking the pristine snow. More unsettling was the complete absence of wildlife. No tracks, no sounds, not even the hardy ravens that usually thrive in these conditions. The silence felt almost solid, like a physical presence pressing against my RV's windows. The aurora appeared just at sunset, but something about it was wrong. Instead of the usual dancing curtains of light, these formed geometric patterns too precise to be natural. My equipment registered impossible readings, energy signatures that didn't match any known type of atmospheric phenomenon. The lights seemed to pulse in sequence, like they were communicating in some alien code. The first anomaly appeared in my cameras around midnight. The aurora's patterns began forming recognizable shapes, circles, triangles, and more complex geometries that hurt my eyes to look at. My atmospheric sensors detected energy waves that didn't match any known part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The temperature outside dropped far below what my equipment could measure. Everything electronic in my RV started behaving erratically. Screens displayed images I hadn't recorded, showing impossible perspectives of the lights from angles that would have to be above the atmosphere. Then my cameras captured something that made my blood freeze. Dark shapes moving within the aurora itself, their forms seeming to leak down from whatever dimension the lights were connected to. My scientific mind struggled to rationalize what my cameras were recording. The shapes within the aurora moved with obvious intelligence, their patterns suggesting something like language. When I enhanced the footage, I discovered they were leaving traces, threads of impossible light that connected directly to my RV's electronics, creating a network of ethereal energy that grew more complex by the minute. I tried to maintain professional detachment, documenting everything I could. The lights responded to my cameras in ways that defied physics, bending toward my lenses, creating interference patterns that formed more of those eye-straining geometries. The temperature inside my V began to fluctuate wildly, and ice crystals formed in impossible patterns across my windows, matching the shapes in the sky. The real terror started when I reviewed my older footage. Every photo I'd taken since entering the valley showed the same dark shapes, barely visible at first, but growing clearer with each shot. They seemed to be emerging gradually, using the aurora's energy to pierce whatever barrier separated their reality from ours. My cameras hadn't just been documenting them, they'd been helping them break through. Physical evidence began accumulating inside my RV. The metal walls developed a strange iridescent sheen that pulsed in sync with the aurora. My equipment, though supposedly hardened against electromagnetic interference, started receiving signals that contained fragments of what sounded like voices, thousands of them, speaking in overlapping languages that spanned centuries. The changes accelerated as the night deepened. My instruments detected an expanding field of anomalous energy centered on my RV. The aurora's light seemed to be concentrating around my vehicle, creating a vortex of cold fire that twisted in ways light shouldn't move. Through my rapidly frosting windows, I watched as the snow around me began to crystallize into structures that resembled circuit boards made of ice. My last functioning camera captured the moment everything changed. The aurora descended like a curtain of living light, enveloping my V in its cold radiance. The dark shapes within it became clearer, revealing forms that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Then every screen in my RV displayed the same message. The observation begins. Your lens has opened our door. Panic set in as I realized my V's engine wouldn't start. Every electrical system had been transformed by the aurora's touch. The displays showed impossible readings, coordinates that didn't exist on any earthly map. Through the windshield, I watched as the familiar landscape of Gates Valley began to shift, overlaid with ghostly images of what looked like alien architecture made of frozen light. Each escape attempt was thwarted by the environment itself. The snow responded to my presence, forming barriers of crystallized light that herded me back toward my RV. My compass spun wildly, and my GPS showed locations scattered across different continents, as if the very space around me was becoming unstable. The aurora above had transformed into a swirling vortex of geometric patterns that seemed to be watching my every move. The entities revealed themselves fully as the temperature plummeted to levels that should have been fatal. They emerged from the aurora like tears in reality, their bodies composed of living light that hurt my mind to look at. They moved with impossible grace, leaving trails of frozen energy that transformed everything they touched. My cameras recorded their emergence, though the footage showed angles and perspectives that didn't match what my eyes saw. My first direct communication with them came through my camera's viewfinder. The images shifted to show me visions of other times, other places where they had manifested. I saw ancient cave paintings depicting the same geometric patterns, medieval manuscripts filled with descriptions of lights that spoke, and modern photographs marked with their distinctive signatures. They had been watching us through every lens ever turned toward the sky. The truth about Gates Valley emerged from my research data, now transformed by their influence. This wasn't just a place where the aurora was visible. It was a thin point between dimensions, a place where the barrier between realities had worn thin from repeated observations. Every photographer who had vanished here had become part of their network, their cameras serving as nodes in an ever-growing web of surveillance. As the night wore on, I made a terrifying discovery in my camera's memory. Every photograph I'd ever taken contained traces of their presence, growing stronger as I approached this moment. They hadn't just found me here. They had been guiding me to this place my entire career, using my own passion for photography to bring me to their doorway. The aurora above pulsed with new intensity, and the dark shapes began their final approach. They pursued me through the transformed valley, their light forms bending space itself around them. The snow under my feet had become a shifting maze of frozen energy patterns, each step carrying me through what felt like multiple realities at once. The aurora above had spread to cover the entire sky, turning the world into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. My photographer's instincts betrayed me. I couldn't stop documenting even as I fled. Each photo I took seemed to strengthen their presence, the camera's sensor acting like a beacon drawing them closer. They moved like liquid light, their forms shifting between states that human perception couldn't properly process. The temperature dropped with their approach until the air itself began to crystallize. The confrontation came in a clearing where the transformed snow had arranged itself into a perfect replica of my camera's sensor array. The entities surrounded me, their light forms pulsing with patterns that my mind began to recognize as language. Through my viewfinder, I understood their purpose. They were collectors of perspectives, gatherers of ways of seeing, and my lifetime of photography had made me a perfect addition to their gallery. Using my knowledge of optics and light, I tried to fight back. I set up every light source I had, hoping to disrupt their forms with competing illumination. The entities responded by absorbing the light, their geometries becoming even more complex. My attempts at defense only gave them more ways to manifest, more patterns to add to their ever-growing vocabulary of vision. In desperate inspiration, I remembered what I'd learned about quantum observation, how the act of measuring something changes it. I turned my cameras away from them and toward the snow instead, focusing on capturing the mundane, the ordinary, the definitively earthly. The entities' forms began to waver, their connection to our reality weakening as I deliberately limited my perspective. My chance came when their light forms started to destabilize, their patterns becoming less coherent as I continued to document only the normal world around me. I ran toward where I thought the valley's entrance should be, my cameras recording nothing but footprints in snow, creating a trail of ordinary reality through their transformed domain. The last thing I saw was a flash of aurora light that contained every color human eyes were never meant to see. I woke up 2 weeks later in an Anchorage hospital, my eyes permanently altered by my encounter. The doctors couldn't explain why my pupils now respond to light frequencies that their instruments can't detect, or why my retinas show evidence of structures that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. Under certain conditions, my eyes emit a faint aurora-like glow. My RV was recovered at the valley's edge. Its metal structure transformed into something that specialists refused to examine directly. Every surface was covered in patterns that seemed to shift when not observed, and all the cameras inside had evolved into devices that no longer record just visible light. The photographs still in their memory cards show perspectives that shouldn't be possible, views from angles that don't exist in three-dimensional space. The changes went beyond the physical. My perception had been fundamentally altered. I see layers in everything now, glimpses of other dimensions overlapping with our reality. Every photograph I take contains elements I never intended to capture, showing fragments of that other place bleeding through. Sometimes, when I look through a camera's viewfinder, I can see them still watching, still collecting new ways of seeing. Research into similar cases revealed a pattern I wish I hadn't found. Throughout history, artists and photographers have vanished while documenting the aurora, each disappearance preceded by reports of geometric light patterns and equipment malfunction. More disturbing are the innovations that followed each incident, new ways of capturing and manipulating light, advances in optics that seemed to come from nowhere. The most troubling development came during a routine eye exam last month. The ophthalmologist's equipment detected something growing behind my retinas, crystalline structures that form perfect geometric patterns matching the aurora's designs. When I look at digital screens, I sometimes see messages forming in light patterns that shouldn't be possible. They're still watching, still collecting, using my transformed eyes as their new lens. Yesterday, I received an unmarked package containing a single photograph. It shows me in Gates Valley, but from an angle that would have been impossible, as if taken from inside the aurora itself. More terrifying is what I see when I look at it through my altered eyes. Layers upon layers of reality, each containing countless other photographers they've collected over the centuries. Their gallery grows, and my vision has become their newest exhibition. Sometimes, in the dark, I catch myself seeing things that no human was ever meant to observe, and I understand why they chose me. Every photographer dreams of capturing the impossible, but some impossibilities capture back. Asterisk editor's note: David Nakamura's current location is officially listed as unknown,